of this programming. I'm really excited again to have Emily Rudder here. Emily, welcome. Thank you so much for bringing your wisdom on supporting early career talent in your podcasting team. Emily joins us from the amazing Wonder Media Network, which has a shared interest with our event co-sponsors, the State of Women. Again, thank you, Anu, for your words and being here with us. Emily is the Chief of Staff at Wonder Media Network and works in so many different places and doing what I might call herding cats. I don't know, Emily, if that resonates with you, but I can only imagine, given the scope and span of your work. So I will let you take it from here on how we can support early talent in our spaces with whatever tasks and roles we are given. I'm going to mute myself and stop sharing the screen. Emily, take it away, and thank you again.
Great. Thank you so much. Thank you for the warm welcome. Thank you everyone for being here. I sometimes like to just explain a little bit what it means to be Chief of Staff at WMN, since that title is vague. It means a different thing at one company than it does here. But in my role, I work across editorial and development. On the editorial side of things, I often serve as an editor or managing producer, or even just project manager for some of our shows. On the development side of things, I'm working to expand our IP pipeline, so bring our podcasts into the book space or the TV and film space. And then also my day-to-day, I do a lot of our hiring and also manage our production assistants. And I was excited when Amanda reached out about the topic, because supporting early talent, I think, is very important, obviously not just in our industry, but writ large. And it's something I think a lot about at WMN, and hopefully everyone is thinking about. So I've outlined a couple of ways that I think about supporting early talent, but like this can definitely be an open discussion and conversation, like welcome other ideas. I think I'm always growing in this way, just as our early talent people are as well. So the first thing that came to mind when I was thinking about supporting more junior staff is, what are you doing from day one? I think like the first few weeks in an organization are really important. And one of the ways that you can really support early talent is helping them build a foundation of knowledge that they need to be successful in their job from the first day. The thing that's fun about our industry, I think, is that people come into audio from many different backgrounds. I think now we're starting to see that people have like done podcasts at their school newspaper. But even just 2 years ago, that wasn't really an option. When I was a student in college, no one was really doing podcasts aside from maybe working on the student radio, but many people come into audio from various different spaces. And I think that makes for a really strong like workforce when people come in from such different spaces. But at the same time, it means we haven't built the same level of knowledge. We didn't all take intro to podcasting in college or something. And so I think it's important not to assume that people have a certain baseline of knowledge, but being really open about communicating what certain things mean. Like there's a lot of jargon in this space, like what is a pre-roll? What is a post-roll? What is dynamic ad insertion? What does it mean for something to be embedded? Like there's so much lingo. And so from day one, just making sure that people feel comfortable building that foundation with you. And I think a lot of that also comes from asking questions. So I like to create an environment where questions are really encouraged. Tell people many times, like, you can never ask a question too big, too small. Please flag if you're confused. And then the other thing about building this foundation of trust is, I think you also can't assume from day one that people are just going to come to you if they have a question, or just going to come to you if they're not feeling supported. Like that can be a difficult thing, and it takes time to build trust with people who are reporting to you. And so you have to ask the questions of people who are earlier in their career, like, how are you feeling? How did this project go? Or I noticed X, Y, Z. Like, make sure you're also asking questions just as you're encouraging them to ask questions. Another thing I wanted to stress about supporting early talent is make sure, try as best as you can to ensure they have many unofficial mentors across the company. And this is maybe easier to facilitate if like you're their manager, but I think it's important for young talent to have more than just you to go to if they have questions. I have a couple of examples of how we do this at WMN. we launched a like producer slash production assistant mentor mentee relationship program, like internally, so that every production assistant and junior producer has a mentor producer they can go to with questions. Because we were finding everyone is always so busy. And I think sometimes early talent feel like they have questions, but they don't want to overwhelm or burden someone, which I can certainly relate to. And I was just starting out, like feeling like I have these questions, but this person looks really busy. And like, you know, I don't want to bother them with my dumb question. So we created this like official mentorship program, even though it's internal. And I feel like we're a small team and everyone's kind of an unofficial mentor, but just like adding a little more of an official oomph to it. So having regular meetings just gives people another space and time to ask questions. The other thing we do to make sure that early talent feel like they can have lots of unofficial mentors is in our onboarding program, trainings are given across the company. So it's not just like one person or me or whoever their manager might be giving them all the trainings of here's how we do production timelines, here's how we produce episodes, but you get trainings from many different people across the company so that like from the first few weeks, you have already, you know, met lots of different people, been taught by lots of different people, and then you have more people you can go to with questions rather than just your manager. I think the other thing that came to mind is like making mistakes and encouraging people to make mistakes. This is something that I feel like becomes cliched when you're talking about starting out in your talent and in your career. Like people say, yeah, it's good to make mistakes, which is easier said than done. This is something I can be working on personally. I have perfectionist tendencies. It's one of my weakest points. But it is true that I think like making mistakes can be one of the fastest ways to learn. And when you're managing someone who's earlier in their career, once they've made that mistake, the most important thing is like what comes next? Like what is the learning experience from that mistake, and not just sweeping it under the rug or just saying like, oh, it's all good, don't worry about it. Like it's true that it really might be all good and it's not a problem, but I think it's important to have that stage where you talk about what happened so it doesn't happen again, or else it can like create this pattern where then one person feels like they're just making the same mistake over and over again. And it may be because there's like a larger communication issue, or like what are the bigger problems we can address. So I think that learning that comes after the mistake is really important. And as a manager or a mentor to someone who's earlier in their career, like you can have a really helpful role in facilitating whatever that learning is following some sort of mistake. The next thing I want to talk about is goal setting, which of course is important no matter what stage of your career you're in. But with early talent specifically, I think setting both big goals and tactical goals is really important. I've personally been in like positions where my goals were like really big and vague to kind of help me get to the next step. And I remember thinking like, okay, I need to be better at XYZ. Like, I don't know how I'm going to demonstrate that I've done that. And so one thing we try to do is maybe you have some overarching goals. Like maybe your overarching goal is like become a stronger producer. Like, what does that mean, right? Like, do you need to be good at mixing and scoring? Do you need to be good at writing interview style scripts? Do you need to be better at creating story arcs for narrative style shows? Do you need to be good at coaching hosts? Like, there's a lot of ways you can get really granular with bigger goals. And figuring out like what shows are you currently staffed on where you can demonstrate that you're working on that thing. And so we use Asana internally, just like generally for production timelines. So with my reports, I also create an Asana board for their goals where like the bigger task is whatever that thing might be. And then we set the more granular goals and we outline what shows are you working on or what projects are you doing where you can fulfill those. And because you're working on a show at the moment, you can also create a timeline for those goals too, which is really helpful. And then the last thing I'll say about goal setting, I could talk about goal setting for a really long time, is it's important to continually check in with your manager about goal setting, because I think too often we have these like review periods, right? Like maybe you get reviewed every June, maybe it's just once a year, or maybe it's twice a year. But in between like your review where you like set goals of what you need to work on for the year and your next review, sometimes there aren't really check-ins on how your goals are doing. And that might lead to a process in which you're in your review and you're getting feedback on something that you didn't know you were supposed to be working on. And so there's a little bit of like just confusion. And I think it's important to be like really upfront about how the goals are going and checking in. So when you have these bigger review periods, there are no surprises. Like, you've been checking in about this like every month or every week. So there's no surprises. Like, we know that you fulfilled all these things, or we know that this is your area of improvement. So setting goals is great, but I think checking in on the goals is also really important. And this is something I've learned from my own failure of not checking in with my direct reports enough about how their goal setting was going. The last thing that I wanted to hit on is, when you're working with someone who is earlier in the career, who's ready for that next step, one thing that I think really helps them reach that next step is to make sure that they're staffed on reach projects. And so that might require a little finagling, because you don't want to just throw them in the deep end on some new project or some new skill they've never done before and be like, I think you're ready, like, good luck, go for it. And I've certainly been in that instance before. And usually it's not, you like figure it out, but you struggle. And so the way that we try to do this at WMN is like making sure that we have ample support and more support than usual for this type of task, for this type of skill, so that this person can try something new, ask questions throughout the process, and have longer to work on it than if they were already, quote unquote, at that next step. So like, to get more granular, specific about what this might look like, when we have production assistants or junior producers who have demonstrated that they are getting ready to be promoted ahead of when the review cycle is, we try to staff them on a project where they can work on something that's a little more challenging. So maybe it's like fully producing an episode of some show, and maybe before, the production assistant had just been cutting clips for it, or whatever it might be. And we'll just build longer review windows with their producer, editor, whoever's reviewing, so that there's more back and forth. And then I think the really nice thing is, after this project has wrapped, then you have your review coming up, and then you have a data point of, well, I just did this thing, like, I'm ready for the next step. And so I think it's good for the direct report. It's good for the manager who might be pushing for that person to get promoted, and just demonstrate why they're ready for the promotion. Yeah, so I guess in summation, I think there's like a lot of tactical things you can do to try and support people who are starting out earlier in their career. But by and large, I think the most important thing is to just be a supportive mentor and manager, and facilitate and create that environment in which people feel comfortable asking questions, comfortable coming to you with problems, creating open lines of communication and building trust, so that you can really be a partner with them in helping them reach the next step. That's kind of it, but would welcome questions, thoughts, and I'll defer to you, Amanda, in terms of what the next steps are.
Yeah, such really important points. And I think all of us can empathize on being both sides of this, where you have been on a tight production schedule and it's like, oh man, this person is still just like delivering product that adds work to my plate. And then also being that person on the other side, receiving grace for those moments where, oh, this is a really helpful learning. Folks, please feel free to raise your hand, and then you can come on mic and ask a question. Or if you don't wish for your voice to be captured on the video, you can absolutely type it in the chat. I have a few prepared questions, but I'd love to give this to the wonderful participants in here. I'll wait for a second and see. Okay. I think one thing that comes to mind, I love how you named Asana, and we're all navigating remote teams and collaboration, which I think just amplifies the pain points when it comes to giving feedback and being very specific on something that needs to be edited or iterated. What other tools have you found useful, Emily, in like asynchronous collaboration and communication? I'm sure that emails and Slack are just not always the best way to keep track of stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I think one way we've started to use Slack differently actually is just by like using the huddle feature, or just like directly video calling someone. Especially when you're like troubleshooting some sort of problem. I think it's easy to get caught up in like, you're in another meeting and you're multitasking, trying to figure out this other thing is going on, and so you're slacking them. And we now have gotten into a habit of just saying like, hey, can I call you really quickly? And it's as if you're like in the office, just like tapping someone on the shoulder, which we used to do a lot more of. And sometimes I'll message someone and I'll literally say like, hey, nothing wrong at all. This is the kind of situation where I'd come stop by your desk. But since we're not in the office, like, can we just do a quick huddle? I feel like I read this Twitter thread recently just on the topic of Slack about how, like, as a manager, like, you should not send like ominous Slack messages to like direct reports. I've definitely been the recipient of that, where you like get this message like, hey, do you have a couple minutes? And you kind of like stare at it, like, what is coming next? What did I do? You're like racking your brain, like, did something go wrong? So I'm also a big fan of being like really communicative and sensitive of the fact that like something can in the virtual space can come off as really cryptic when you don't mean it to. And so, especially when you're virtual, just like over communicating as much as possible, whether it's on Slack video calls or whatever it might be.
I love that you're naming the ominous hey. Or a lot of people think brevity is, what is that phrase? Goodness gracious, my brain is not working. Brevity is the, come on, folks.
Yeah, I know what phrase you're getting at.
I think that's not applicable to written stuff. Now it's like, please make sure you include context and empathize with the experience of being the receiving end, because nobody can read each other's minds. But yeah, I love that you named that, Emily. I just wanted to ask any other question. Thank you, Joni.
The soul of
Brevity
wit,
is the soul of wit. Indeed. Indeed. And that holds true, but we're not trying to be witty. We're trying to communicate. So I'll do a yes and with that one. I appreciate you all. The other thing, Emily, is like, the landscape of talent is definitely transforming, and culture and quote unquote professionalism has also been kind of put under the microscope. What do we really mean when we say professional or proactive or assertive, and how are we mitigating those factors? So I'm curious on, especially for young and newer people who have a bit of a generation difference, any commentary or observations for that?
Yeah, such a good question. And definitely like, I think it's really good. We're like talking openly about what these like coded words mean. Like, what does it mean to say someone's professional or something? I think about this a lot in the context of hiring. Like, the phrase like, is this person going to fit in here? Is this person a good fit culture wise? Like, I think I try to be very careful with how we're using that language. Or like, sometimes we've said like, oh, we just need to hire another Amanda or something. But like, what is it? Do we need another Amanda? Or like, do we need someone who can fill these certain skills? Because this person we're hiring might not look exactly like this one person or have the same background or whatever it might be. So I also think like before someone even gets there, like the hiring process is really important in thinking about all those questions. In terms of professionalism, I mean, I think the pandemic has also just helped us all be like more casual. Like we don't really have an office dress code. Not that we necessarily did before, you can wear whatever you want. But yeah, I don't know if you have a specific question, but I think important that we're having all these conversations about what this language means and who we're talking about when we say this language, and like calling each other in, I guess, so to speak, when this kind of might be said in certain settings.
I love that, Emily. I think about this all the time too. One of the through lines of my career has always been like trying to dismantle boundaries that are visible or invisible. I'm sorry, not boundaries. I like boundaries. Barriers. Goodness gracious. Prefrontal cortex is misfiring today. It's not the coffee. And just really interrogating, like, what are we really saying? Say what we mean what we say. The other thing that I really appreciate with especially the topics in the audience here is like, back in the day, professionalism was coded with like perceptions of power and how that's expressed and what genders and identities tend to be possessing that. And I like how we're moving into a space now where we're not saying that you have to possess those traits or look or sound or act like that to be effective in your role and to like encourage the growth. And I think that this move towards empathy and nurturing talent and building and budgeting and time too, as I loved what you named it, build trust. I mean, that the ROI on that, if you want to, return on investment on that, is just infinite. And we're seeing the impacts of that. So the last thing I'll say in closing, unless you have anything else you want to wrap up with, Emily, is I want to thank you so much for Wonder Media Network. We were very grateful for your sponsorship of one of our first TPA interns. Such a positive experience, and we learned a lot about what's effective in terms of really helping somebody new to a space on a tight timeline still have really great educative experience and learn a lot. So props to you all.
I'm so glad to hear. Yeah, no, thank you, Amanda, also for, I think, just your idea of what this kind of discussion should be and everything you're doing with TPA in the space. I think it's really good to continually have these discussions. So thank you.
My deepest pleasure and honor and privilege. And so, Emily, thank you so much. If you want to stick around and mingle with our members, you're welcome to. I'm going to go ahead and share the screen before I hit the stop recording button. See, I'm learning. Folks, I did put this in the chat a little bit earlier, but we have this survey that the wonderful folks at the State of Women are hoping to hear your feedback through. And then it has a through link as well for completing information on the Podcast Academy, the specific lunch and learn. We're always trying to lunch and learn from y'all. Get it? So anyway, I'm going to hit stop recording. Thank you all very much. And the next part of this talk is going to